We may never know exactly what happened, but Officer Wilson, like anybody else who is charged with a crime, benefits from due process and a reasonable doubt standard. And if there is uncertainty about what happened, then you can't just charge him anyway just because what happened was tragic.
That was President Obama today at a town hall meeting at Benedict College in Columbia, South Carolina. The president answering a question from the crowd on why his administration's Justice Department did not charge Ferguson, Missouri police officer Darren Wilson in the shooting death of teenager Michael Brown, an 18-year-old. A Missouri grand jury and now the Justice Department have determined that no criminal charges are appropriate against Officer Wilson, and that suggestions that this officer shot the 18-year-old Brown as Brown was surrendering with his hands up were not supported by the facts. The DOJ's conclusions, all of which were favorable to Officer Wilson, none of which supported his critics' case against him, stand in stark contrast to the tsunami of misinformation and innuendo that were spread in the aftermath of Michael Brown's death.
He turned around and he put his hands in the air, but the officer still approached with his weapon drawn, and he fired several more shots, and my friend died.
We want to know why he felt the need to execute Michael and Leslie's child.
How can you justify killing and shooting down a man in the middle of a street, execution style?
The issue is how a young man with no deadly threat, no life-extenuating circumstances was shot multiple times.
We have a responsibility to come together and do everything we can to achieve justice for this family. A vigorous prosecution must now be pursued.
Hands up. Don't shoot.
Hands up. Don't shoot.
Hands up. Don't shoot.
And all of those people have since come out to apologize to Officer. Oh, wait. Rich Lowry is the editor of the National Review. Leslie Marshall is a progressive radio talk show host, and both are Fox News contributors. And now even the president, Rich, today suggesting that it was basically just this tough, reasonable doubt standard that led to Officer Wilson not being charged. And before I give you the floor, I just want to take the audience through it, okay? It wasn't just the tough, reasonable doubt standard. This man was exonerated by the DOJ. And let me give you a sample of what the DOJ's report says. The witness accounts that Brown was surrendering with his hands up do not support a prosecution. They are inaccurate, inconsistent with the physical and forensic evidence, and are materially inconsistent with the witness's own prior statements. The evidence does not establish that it was unreasonable for Wilson to perceive Brown as a threat while Brown was punching and grabbing him in the SUV and attempting to take his gun. There is no credible evidence to refute Wilson's belief that he was acting in self-defense. Listen to this one. In analyzing all the evidence, federal prosecutors found Wilson's account to be credible. Brown did not sustain gunshot wounds to his back. There are no witnesses who could testify credibly that Wilson shot Brown while Brown was clearly attempting to surrender. And here's the last one for you. Multiple credible witnesses corroborate virtually every material aspect of Wilson's account and are consistent with physical evidence. And so where does Officer Wilson go to get his reputation back?
He'll never get it from these people. And what the president said was so weaselly. You know, he's suggesting, oh, it's such a close call, and it's just that he has the reasonable doubt standard on his side. This is not a close call in the least. If the president had any decency, he would just say, look, I like to tell people sometimes things they don't want to hear. I know some people on my side don't want to hear this, but there is zero credible evidence that this was a racist assassination. But he won't say that because the left is full of Ferguson truthers who are invested in a lie about this case, that Michael Brown held up his arms and said, don't shoot. There's zero credible evidence that that happened, but a movement has been based around that falsehood.
Leslie?
Well, you know, Rich, I do agree with some of what you said. However, when you look at over 30,000 pages, and when you look at all of the racism in that police department, racism through many police departments in this country, the president being an African-American male himself, there are people that have personal feelings. But the president, I feel, has been very clear that there has not and is not enough evidence. There was no indictment that came down. And after this Department of Justice investigation, that there was not enough evidence to charge him. And I feel the president was very strong in backing the Department of Justice in their investigation and in their findings and the outcome of that.
To say there's not enough evidence to indict him. All the evidence, all the credible evidence, the physical evidence, and the witnesses whose testimony is consistent with the physical evidence and is internally consistent, all suggest this is a justifiable act of self-defense.
That's
so again,
what the
it wasn't a
DOJ
close
said.
call. And look, I don't like the traffic stop policy in Ferguson or any of those jurisdictions there in Missouri. It's predatory, it's stupid, but it's not necessarily racist, and it's not what this movement was based around.
And
it was based around the idea this Michael Brown was shot in cold blood.
And what about, Leslie, all those people whose sound bites we just played? I mean, Al Sharpton, there was no deadly threat. They're talking about how Officer Wilson executed this young man. Executed. The governor of Missouri saying a prosecution must take place. Where are the mea culpas?
Well, I don't think you're going to hear the mea culpas, because I think there's still anger and there's a disconnect between the African-American and most minority communities. When you talk about those stops, there is racial profiling involved.
But let me just ask you this. But let me interrupt you and ask you, Leslie. I'm going to give you the floor. Wouldn't it be so much more credible if they came out and said, we were wrong about Officer Wilson, but we want to talk about what the DOJ found with respect to Ferguson. Then people might listen. But when they're standing firm on Officer Wilson, not acknowledging that all the innuendo and rhetoric they ginned up was false and totally baseless, it's tough then to listen as they get to point B.
Well, I understand what you're saying, but there's not going to be an apology, because you have to remember there's the perception, there's the reality, there are the facts. O.J. Simpson acquitted. How many of us believe that he is guilty? And the same goes for Officer Wilson. There are people out there, and not just in the African-American community, although the numbers show mostly African-Americans feel personally that he is guilty,
well, you know what
even though the facts do not bear that to be true, including this federal investigation.
You know what would really help if the President of the United States, who's commented at length about this case, you know, he could go a long way to convince those people that their perception is wrong, if he had the courage just to say what the facts are.
Just to repeat what was in the DOJ's report. But neither Eric Holder nor President Obama has done that. In fact, none of these officials has done that. They're just words in a report that is much more focused on the Ferguson PD. I got to leave it there. Thank you both.
Thanks, Megan.
Thank you.